Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tracy Rathbone-Steiff, the Executive Director of the Town Center CID, and we are so excited to have so many of you join us today for our first virtual Lunch and Learn. We will be talking about placemaking today with our consultants from Gresham Smith Partners, as well as our team from the CID and the Alliance. Alicia Smith, our Director of Projects and Planning, will be leading the conversation for the CID, and I'm going to turn it over to her now to kick us off.
Hi, I'm Alicia Smith. As Tracy mentioned, I'm Director of Projects and Planning for the CID. So the CID has been working through multiple corridor studies over the last couple years. And then this year, one of our main projects is the Chastain Road Corridor Study. And that was awarded to Gresham Smith, and we were using LCI funds through the ARC for that study. Through the studies, we've been really looking at the planning and visioning of the CID, and part of that parlays into placemaking. And so that's something the CID and the Town Center Alliance has been really working together on understanding and educating people about placemaking, what can happen out there, what's happening nationally. And that is where we wanted to bring in Gresham Smith today to help with a lunch and learn, to help show people some of the opportunities that can take place. This is all conceptual, so we're gonna all learn together today. So I would like to introduce Aaron Thorson and Aaron Hathaway, both from Gresham Smith. They will be helping us with our presentation today, and there'll be a lot of interactive moments too that you can jump in on and give your opinions and take little surveys as well. And before we turn it over to them, I wanted to say that you can use your Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. We will try to get to all the questions at the end of the presentation. However, that's all depending on time, the time we have allotted left to answer those questions. If we don't get to those, we will make sure that we can respond to those at a later date. Okay, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Aaron and Aaron at this time.
Great, thank you so much, Alicia. Today's presentation, we're going to just talk a little bit about what is creative placemaking and what are some of the elements and concepts that go into making a great place. We'll provide a couple of examples and some case studies from throughout the Southeast and as well as abroad, in fact. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Chastain Road LCI corridor study itself and what that study entails and how we're starting to explore some placemaking opportunities along Chastain Road. So just a little bit as an introduction to Gresham Smith, we are an architecture, engineering, and planning firm that provides design solutions for clients throughout the Southeast and really 27 locations, extending now into the Midwest and as far west as Dallas. Aaron and I represent two of our markets. Aaron is with our land planning group in Louisville, and I'm with our transportation market based in our Atlanta office right here. We also provide a variety of services in architecture for aviation, healthcare, corporate and urban design, as well as water and environment services. And one of the things that I think is really great about having such a wide-ranging firm is our ability to collaborate across all of these different markets. And so it's not uncommon for folks in our land planning group to partner with folks in our transportation group, just as Aaron and I are doing along with so many of our colleagues to help facilitate this Chastain Road corridor study. So to kick things off, we want to just go ahead and get you all oriented to what we're going to be talking about today and start to explore some of your favorite places to go. So if you would, whether on a tablet or a phone or even in another screen from your laptop, go to menti.com. So you can see the web address at the top of your screen there, and then enter the code 32603. And that should give you access to the poll that we'll be using for a handful of questions throughout the course of today's presentation. When you get there, you'll see a question: what public place do you go out of your way to visit? So we'd like you to just type in your responses, hit submit, and tell us what are some of those places that you really like to go to visit. Where are the places that you make a point of visiting? Not just on your daily routine, but where are those special places that you like to take a trip, whether it's, maybe for hiking or picnicking or, just a place you like to go and sit and relax. So you can see the answers coming in. Kennesaw Mountain, a very nearby and important public space for Cobb County and really throughout the region. We've got Big Creek Greenway. Some really great responses here. Canton Street, Roswell. A variety of different types. So we see trails, we see parks, we see, you know, public places within private developments. We see natural settings, more kind of built settings, downtown types of locations, as well as much more natural kind of rural areas. So that's a really great representation of all of the different types of places. And I think you'll see some of the examples that we're going to highlight and kind of how they correlate to a lot of these places as we go forward. So thank you so much for your responses. Keep those devices handy. We're going to continue to do this throughout the course of the presentation. And with that, let's move on. So placemaking is about reinventing spaces, sometimes public spaces, sometimes semi-public spaces, and kind of reclaiming them or reinventing them for use by, you know, people. A lot of times these might be underutilized spaces, they might be open spaces, but it's a way to kind of highlight physical and cultural features to generate identities and kind of, you know, really start to create a sense of place, of community, of location within these open spaces. And sometimes, you know, they can be as small as a parking spot or an alley, or, you know, the space behind a building, but they can be as vast and wide open as, you know, some of the public spaces that were mentioned earlier, Lake Allatoona. You know, those are also places. And it's about a variety of different strategies to kind of creating a sense of place, often in a very community-driven, kind of hands-on way to making improvements. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, and she'll walk you through a couple of examples and case studies.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, so community-driven, we are sharing this slide with you guys because this is sort of our mantra at Gresham Smith. That we talk about this all the time. Placemaking starts with people and it ends with people. You know, we believe that a project is better in the end if in the beginning we all come together as a community and we listen to all of those voices and opinions. We have a better project in the end. And so what makes a great place? You know, there's a lot of parks out there, there's a lot of different places, but when they're really successful, there's a lot of things that go into a great place. This is a diagram from the Project for Public Spaces organization. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of things to think about when we think about creating great places. So sociability, you know, this is about sort of promoting active engagement of all people in social activities. So oftentimes we talk about 8 to 80. What that means is creating a place that's usable by someone who's as young as 8 years old or as old as 80 years old, and sort of everything in between that. Uses and activities, you know, great places are lively. They provide a really unique experience. They're often settings for celebrations or sort of large gatherings. Comfort and image. So this is about a great place creates a sense of safety and security. It's also, you know, a sustainable place. And access and linkages, destinations, creating destinations that are convenient and also connect other places together. So kind of all of these things help contribute to a greater place. And kind of thinking back to all the places that you guys typed in earlier, where can placemaking happen? Oftentimes your first thought are parks or plazas, downtowns, but they can also, placemaking can also happen in public buildings. It can be public markets. And more recently, we're seeing a trend in placemaking happening along streets and sidewalks. So rethinking our public right-of-way and dedicating that back to people instead of always just cars. And so why is this important? Why is it important to think about it for the corridor study? Placemaking can provide a sense of belonging. It can create beautiful places. It creates community organization and a sense of pride. It helps increase physical activity by getting people out of their cars and moving around in different types of transportation, whether it be biking or walking and running. It creates better connection between uses. And it promotes economic development and small-scale entrepreneurship. It creates more desirable jobs, and it encourages creativity, among a lot of other things. So we're gonna jump into a few case studies just to kind of dive into what is it that we're talking about and kind of show off a variety of ways placemaking exists. So the first one is the night market. And this is an opportunity recognized by Gresham Smith and a local organization, a local neighborhood organization. We saw this opportunity of this sort of underutilized block of a street in a neighborhood. And we came together and organized a pop-up market. This market happens once a month on a Friday night. And you know, it started out as a really small thing with like temporary seating, and now it's grown to have sort of its own identity. People travel from all across the city to come to this event, and usually there's over 3,000 people per event. And what's really great here is that the local organization has prioritized selecting vendors who live and work in the neighborhood. So the identity of the market is really rooted in this neighborhood. So you can see here in the green is highlighted where the street is. The two streets next to it are sort of really major corridors of the area. And so this sort of leftover triangle becomes pretty vacant. You can see the picture in the lower right-hand corner is a glimpse of what it looks like on a daily basis. There was a lot of kind of vacant buildings within that little complex there. And, you know, there's a lot of safety issues. There's the railroad tracks. So from a pedestrian standpoint, the circulation of the cars and the people often have a lot of conflict. So we just thought this would be a great place to kind of temporarily take it over and give it back to the neighborhood and to the people. So here's an overview of what sort of a glimpse of what one of the nights looks like whenever it's a market. And actually this is pretty early on. Now the entire space is used up by vendors. So it's kind of jam-packed because it's so popular. But what we've done here is we've started providing people scale elements in this corridor. So we're providing temporary seats, lots of different types of that. We're providing landscape, lighting. And what's kind of remarkable about this project is how it's activated and kind of spurred further projects that have happened from this. So this building that picture here with the mural on it, that is in this larger building, and it was vacant before, but now it's an art gallery. If I flip back actually to this slide, this is a vacant building right now, but there are plans that the developer is redeveloping it to be a permanent market. So all of the sort of temporary pop-up vendors will be able to transition over time to a more brick and mortar location. And a lot of these other facilities that were empty before are now new businesses. So it's really kind of spurred a lot of growth in this neighborhood and created its own identity. So this next case study is a look at sort of a more permanent linear park that's happening in Lexington, Kentucky. Back in the early 2000s, the community kind of came together around this idea of uncovering the Town Branch Creek, which was once along downtown Lexington, but it was put underground in a culvert. And so the community wanted to open that back up and sort of highlight that history of Lexington. So what this park does is it takes pieces of the right-of-way that used to be for cars and kind of carves out a wider linear path. It's about 2.2 miles through the heart of downtown. So you can see right now, this is kind of part of the 2.2 miles, and it's a 4-lane, one-direction road. So it's very kind of unsafe for pedestrians right now. There's like lots of high traffic volume and speeding through that corridor. And so part of what this park does is it narrows those lanes and gives a lot of that space back to the public, creating safer pedestrian conditions. Also, it ties into a lot of other planned and existing trails throughout the town. So it's creating a bigger network of connectivity. It's connecting neighborhoods, people, public spaces, focusing on the safety of those, of that infrastructure. It's also a big goal of the park in highlighting the town branch creek is improving water quality, especially in this urban environment. But ultimately it showcases the history of our downtown landscape. The third case study that we'll talk about is we call Northland Stormwater Retrofit. So this is actually the first example of a private development that is using placemaking. So this is a multi-family development, and the owner recognized that there was a lot of common space, shared space throughout the multi-family development that was really not being used very well. It was also overparked, meaning if you look at the number of parking spaces and the number of units, there are a lot more unnecessary spaces than what was needed. So he wanted to really think about how can we reclaim those space to provide meaningful space to people as well as green infrastructure. So that means, you know, there's a lot of hardscape on this site. So how can we start to collect rainwater in a sustainable way? And so combining those two things, green infrastructure and site amenities, we're kind of getting this layered approach to the project. So here's an overview look at the development. You can see there's lots of asphalt parking around, and in the center here, there is a pool that's hasn't been used in decades, so it just sits in that common space, underutilized. And so we've come in and thought about, rethought about what this center common space could be. We've looked at how can we take away this extra parking and recreate it for the tenants, and also where are other stormwater areas that we can improve water quality. So this center space, this is what we reimagine that pool area to be. So we're stripping out all of that concrete and creating a green space for people. So we're both collecting and cleaning stormwater while offering this new sort of common space for the apartment dwelling units. One great anecdote I have from this project is it's under construction right now, and as soon as the contractor pulled out the old pool and sort of re-leveled the land there, the same day there was kids already kind of out there using that space and kicking around a soccer ball. So it was immediately recognized how much of a difference that this project is going to make to that community. So the last case study I'll show is an example of a much more temporary, look at how we can do placemaking. So it doesn't always have to be a really expensive or long-term solution, but it can be a temporary installation that gets people thinking about something, or it tests ideas. So parking day is something that happens worldwide. This is just the example of what happened in Lexington. So we took over a couple blocks of a street downtown, and it happens to coincide with a gallery hop night. So we get a lot of people walking along the sidewalks. And it's interesting, with just, you know, a few volunteers and a little bit of money, we're able to install a little place in what usually is a parking spot. So, you know, it's a combination. Each parking spot is a different design. It's usually a spot where people can hang out. It usually has amenities like seating and plants. Sometimes there's games, but it's really just questioning the idea of what we're dedicating our right-of-way space to. So what are other examples of placemaking? Just to run through a few other quick examples. Oftentimes you'll see painted streets at crosswalks. This is to help pedestrian safety while also adding art to a location. We look at public art as placemaking. So here's an example of a utility box that's been covered with local artists. Of course, murals are a really big hit, especially in conjunction with other placemaking things. Pop-up markets, like we already talked about. Wayfinding and gateway signage, this is becoming a really popular thing in cities all around the world. You can see here Oaxaca in Mexico. And if it's something that's interactive that people like to take a photograph with, that's a really great way to create a place. Also, we often see placemaking happening in alleys that are underutilized and kind of run down. Communities are starting to rethink what those could be and how people could use them again. Like mentioned before, linear parks are also a great way for placemaking because they're also connecting people to other places and offering recreational activities. You know, rethinking spaces that are just not working right now and coming back and reclaiming them as a community for pocket parks is a really great way to carve out placemaking. And then again, just temporary amenities. So placemaking doesn't always have to be a really long-term thing, but you can start with small temporary moves to just try to get a sense of if it's going to work or not. So if you will, again, go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen. We'd love to hear what you think of the placemaking strategies that we've showed you so far. You're able to pick multiple strategies. So if you type in the code 32603, we'd love to get your reactions on which ones you like the most.
And for those that participated, you should hopefully not have to re-enter the code, and it should just prompt you with the next question.
And a lot of these can be mixed and matched. You know, the signs can also be in parks, and temporary seating can also be in alleys. So, you know, just remember that these are things that are just simple elements that can all be combined kind of together in different various forms, as we've seen in some of those case study examples.
Yeah, and they're not meant to be mutually exclusive or to, you know, indicate that they have to be done, you know, one at a time, you know, on their own either. Like Erin said, it's really, these are just some of the elements, and there's plenty more out there too. We just wanted to highlight a few. So it looks like we're getting a lot of support for pop-up markets and pocket parks, repurposing spaces for pedestrians. This is great.
Yeah. All right, thank you all.
So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the Chastain Road corridor study. I thought that, you know, we just want to, given that, you know, our work right now is focused on this particular study, we wanted to just give you a little bit of background information and then talk a little bit about how some of those strategies that Erin talked about earlier can be applied to the Chastain Road corridor and some of the early exercises that we're going through to sort of explore what those opportunities look like. So as was mentioned, the corridor study is funded in part through Livable Centers Initiative program funding, which has a real focus on creating vibrant, walkable places, you know, promoting and increasing mobility options, access to jobs and services. And it's really about kind of that sense of place and helping to turn Chastain Road into a place that has that sense of place. The CID, as many of you hopefully are well aware, has done a tremendous amount of work in recent years to strengthen the district itself, and they've done so many different planning efforts from their master plan and design guidelines to the corridor studies that Alicia mentioned, to development of the Noonday Creek Trail, Aviation Park, and so many other locations throughout the district. So we're really able to benefit from all the work that has come before us and build on that foundation as we think about all the lessons learned through these different other initiatives and how they can be incorporated into the Chastain Road study. And the challenge to us as a consultant team is really to apply all of these different facets. How can we improve safety, walkability, multimodal mobility? We're looking at concepts for streetscape design and elements of design guidelines, as well as incorporating ideas into wayfinding and signage going forward. The CID has an ongoing initiative, and we're looking to come up with some different ways that we can plug in some ideas into that ongoing effort to update the wayfinding signage throughout the district. And I think importantly, this corridor study for Chastain Road has a market analysis component. So we're also looking at the existing supply and demand for uses like retail, commercial, office, as well as housing in such close proximity to KSU in particular, and looking at identifying different redevelopment opportunities that can provide the basis for some ideas going forward. So the Chastain Road corridor study really is focused on the area between Big Shanty Road and Bells Ferry Road. So you're in close proximity to KSU. You've got a number of commercial uses all throughout the area. Toward the east side of the corridor, a little bit more residential, in close proximity to the park and ride lots, as well as Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. And there's so many opportunities for connectivity to all of these different places, or between all of these different places. In thinking about a corridor, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach potential improvements. So we're looking at existing conditions, safety concerns. We're looking at connectivity, walkability. We're thinking about the infrastructure side, but also the experience of being there. So moving vehicles, moving people, on foot, on bike, but also underneath the streets and sidewalks. What are some of those elements that we can maybe tap into that provide multiple benefits? So I think a lot about the green infrastructure side and how that can provide multiple benefits from, maybe helping to control stormwater runoff, but also, enhancing the look and feel of the corridor, and at the same time, providing a kind of a buffer between the roadway and where the pedestrians and bicyclists might be. And so that is, a way to provide multiple services or benefits to the community by treating kind of one element or one aspect. But we're also thinking about the economic generators and the uses that happen adjacent to this corridor, and how to foster those connections between the road itself, the sidewalk, and those places where people might live, work, eat, dine, hang out, and kind of what can we do within the space of that corridor to improve conditions for everyone. So on the next slide, then, just kind of how do we take all of these elements and incorporate them together in, kind of transforming the existing conditions. So you can see on the right that Chastain Road, is fairly functional, and that's something we've heard from our stakeholder committee that we've been working with over the last few months. It helps people get from point A to point B, but in terms of the experience of being there, it's maybe not necessarily, doing as much as it could. And so we're looking at how we can, enhance the walkability, incorporate technology in a useful way that really benefits users of the corridor, whether on foot or in a car, and help to kind of, create that people-oriented space. So with that, then we're going to start to look a little bit more in detail at the Chastain Road corridor and what some of those possible opportunities might be. And I will turn it over to Erin to do that. But I want to just say, as we move into this portion of the presentation, that we're really in an early kind of exploratory phase here. And what we're going to talk about over the next several slides are different opportunities where we see that we might be able to explore or tap into some of those strategies that Erin had talked about earlier, and how they might be able to fit into the Chastain Road corridor someday down the road in the future. So none of this is recommendations or anything. We're just in a really kind of early exploratory phase.
Yep, absolutely. So as we start to look at Chastain and where placemaking might happen, right now out there in the corridor, there's a lot of issues, but there's also a lot of opportunities. There is sidewalks, but oftentimes there's challenging conditions, whether it's overgrown vegetation or the crosswalks are pretty wide and can feel unsafe. A lot of the private development is very car oriented. So how do you start to carve out public space within those places or make new development, pedestrian priority? And then, like I said, the opportunities with KSU or with other public spaces like Noonday Creek Trail, we start to think about what can the connections be between all of these things and how can we enhance public spaces that are out there. So just to start thinking about public space along this study corridor, we're asking you to go back to Mentimeter and what type of public spaces are missing along the study corridor. And you're able to enter as many responses as you'd like. So we're just trying to get an understanding of what you might wish was there, but isn't. And again, if you've already entered answers for others, you should be able to pull up the same web page. Great. A lot of opportunities. Excellent. Yeah, you guys are hitting on a lot of them. So you're already recognizing what is possible out there. So that's exciting. A lot of reoccurring ones, linear paths, shade, connection, walking. A lot of art keeps popping up. Excellent. All right, so as we start to think about placemaking for the corridor, I just wanted to talk about 3 big themes that we're thinking of and just touch on those quickly. Creating vibrant, walkable communities. While there are lots of different pieces that touch the corridor, as we talked earlier, we really want to try to think about how to connect those. So whether it's from KSU or neighborhoods, but how to get those people to connect to, dining opportunities or retail, or the Noonday Creek Trail. So placemaking should allow those things to happen and allow that connectivity to happen. Increase mobility options and encourage healthy lifestyles. So there are a lot of sidewalks and there are bike lanes out there, but they're usually very underutilized. And so how can we rethink the spaces to make them inviting and appealing and something that people want to use? Improved access to jobs and services. So one of the challenges that we recognize is that there's a lot of private development along the corridor. So we recognize that the public-private partnership is really going to have to come together to create a community-supported place. And then also, you know, one of the things we really want to touch on is creating places that are for everyone, that may have historically been underserved or underrepresented. You know, the people that have jobs there that might not necessarily live there, but allowing everyone who would use this corridor the equal access to those spaces. And a couple other just brainstorming ideas that I wanted to throw out there before we jump into some possible examples to get you thinking about what might be missing or what we could add. So, you know, right now, where can children play along the corridor? Or in the future, where could children play? How can semi-public space be better utilized? So, you know, are there parking lots right now that are often empty, or are there drives that are connecting different developments that we could start to rethink the way we use them instead of just for cars? How can we pull activity outside? So if we're thinking about all of these businesses that are along the corridor, they're all indoors, right? And so like, how can we open up these doors and get that activity out on the street or out in the spaces between parking and those places and kind of reactivate outdoors? How can we reprioritize space for people? So in the future and future developments, how can we, you know, make sure that people are considered in these spaces rather than just vehicle oriented? How can we better connect people so you can easily walk and bike everywhere? So this is a really big opportunity for us. Is, you know, there's KSU in the neighborhoods. Right now, everything feels very disconnected. And so we want to use placemaking as an opportunity to make those connections so that everyone can use them in a much more exciting and meaningful way rather than always having to use your car.
And Erin, I'll just jump in to say that, you know, as we move into these couple of examples, we'd had a question about, you know, the sort of more urban form of some of the examples that we showed earlier, and what they're, you know, are we going to also be able to see some applications of potential strategies for more kind of suburban locations? And I think that the questions that you just highlighted really kind of point to some of those opportunities. And I think one of the unique things that we'll start to talk about more over the next couple slides are those kind of spaces in between the existing developments, and not necessarily thinking about, you know, an urban street with on-street parking, but some of these opportunities in the public rights of way along the roadway, and maybe those public-private partnerships that even look at some of the existing developments and opportunities that fit within those. So again, you know, not necessarily every example is appropriate for every location, and we're starting to sort of generate some ideas, but I think that we'll see through the next few slides a couple of applications that might, you know, start to get at some of that more suburban scale a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we're just going to go through 4 quick examples of where placemaking could possibly happen. Like we said earlier, this is not by any means set in stone projects, but these are just kind of quick ideas, our first kind of glance at the corridor. And right now I'm just showing between I-75 and 575. So just kind of zooming in and looking at, okay, what could happen and where could it happen? So we'll just jump into the number 1, which is this kind of circular drawn path here. So the idea here is that there is the skip span connector, and there's also a multi-use path planned between the roundabout and Chastain along Busby, and in the future it's going to connect down to Big Shanty as well. So we're thinking about, okay, let's also just connect, placemaking should connect to existing infrastructure or existing transportation modes that are already there. So if we think about Chastain corridor and then also the town park drive that's behind it, if we use that to make one large connected loop, that could pull students from KSU down into the developed area and get them closer to dining and retail options. Now, there's nothing to say that the Chastain corridor, this green line couldn't extend one way or the other. This is just an example of a small loop that we could create here. And also the circles on the intersections are also indicating that those moments are really important to get people down across to the south side of Chastain. So the next example we'll look at is we're zooming in a little bit further. Again, here is this future multi-use trail connecting from the Skip Span roundabout down along Busby, and Chastain is right here. So right now there is a really large open right-of-way space along Chastain. It's 90 feet at its widest. There's also a bus stop there. So, you know, for us, this appears to be a great location to possibly have a park. So this, it connects to an existing planned multimodal project. It connects to a bus stop and also connects to those businesses that are fronting Chastain right there. So it's a great example of where you could carve out public right-of-way for a park space. Our third example, just to orient you, this is Chastain Road right up in the upper right-hand corner of the slide. So we're south of Chastain. Here are some commercial developments that are right along Chastain, and further south of that are some multifamily apartment complex. And currently right now, where this green is highlighted, there is a stormwater detention area, and it's makes it impossible to connect from the apartments to the businesses. So this is an example of what maybe a public-private partnership could do, because this clearly is privately owned by either the commercial properties or the apartments, but it is an opportunity to say, okay, well, how could we recreate this space to both serve stormwater and the public, allow for connection between the two. And the fourth, just quick example that we're showing, this is the Village at Town Park. And this is just thinking, okay, what do we do? What could we do if we just blocked off this main corridor for an event? So maybe it's a pop-up market, or maybe it's a Friday night and there's a band playing live music, and all the space is blocked off to traffic and open to the public. There's other ways that vehicular traffic can access from all sides of the development. So it wouldn't inhibit any of that, but it would have to be a private public partnership in order to do something like this. But what it does allow is the businesses that are along this development could participate in this, in the pop-up, in the temporary market, what have you, and sort of showcase what's happening in those buildings. But again, it's like pulling that activity out from the insides into the street and reclaiming space for people. And additionally, sort of like the other examples we looked at, it could possibly spur long-term changes just with a temporary installation. So a quick question that we have is sort of, which of these places would you like to see public space? So we talked about along a road with a linear example along Town Park in Chastain. We talked about in a parking lot, you know, is there parking lots that are underutilized that they could either permanently or temporarily be given to back to people. We talked about the stormwater infrastructure, carving that out for pocket park space, vacant property, new development. That's one we haven't talked about, but there's lots of opportunities for new development and making sure that public spaces is incorporated in that. And then underutilized property, you know, are there spaces that within developments that the business owners know, you know, this isn't working quite well, and let's rethink what this could be. So if you'll use menti.com again and help us see which types of these places you would like. So it looks like pretty even for the most part. underutilized along a road and vacant property? So again, we do recognize that there's a lot of private development, private ownership. So it's going to take a lot of carving out and working with those, which is the sort of root of placemaking, is coming together as a community and working with public-private partnerships to create these places. And sort of one last question that we have for you all is, which of these, out of all those sort of elements we've talked about today, which we know are not comprehensive, but which would you like to see in the study area? And again, these are elements and features that can be mixed and combined, but we're asking you to choose 3 of those to see what you guys might want to see in this corridor.
So again, this is just thinking specifically about Chastain Road and the opportunities that are, you know, along or right adjacent to it, kind of in that area between Bells Ferry and Big Shanty. What are the types of elements that you might like to see us explore a little bit further as we move into the next phases of our study?
Public art seems to be a winner. I think some of that was answered on some other questions too, so that keeps popping up.
Trail.
Yep. Spaces for children. Definitely.
We've got 17 responses so far. Let's just give it another minute if anyone else wants to go ahead and enter their choices. All right. Oh, there you go. Great. So, Erin, I think those were some really great examples, and I hope that everyone has started to be able to think a little bit more about the potential of some of those in-between spaces and unexpected places where we can start to apply some of these elements going forward. I'm going to turn it back over to the folks from the Town Center Community Alliance and the CID to wrap things up.
Thank you, guys. That was a really great presentation. At this time, there are no questions. If you guys, if any of the attendees have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via email. You'll get our contact information in the email. And with that, I'll pass it off to Jennifer.
Thanks, Lucy, and thanks, Erin and Aaron, for that presentation. It was really, really great, and we look forward to continuing our work with you guys on Chastain Road. So as mentioned before, the Alliance is the creative placemaking partner to the CID, and we strategically look at creative placemaking elements that will help the Town Center CID reach their vision for the area. You know, from pocket parks to like Founders Park to a full suite of educational installations we have planned at Aviation Park, to bike share, the Alliance works on projects to enrich the infrastructure of the CID. So we invite you to join us as we continue this work by becoming a member of the Alliance. And your membership provides access to all of our Lunch and Learn events like this one. We have district tours as well and monthly updates. And then with your support and your engagement with the Alliance, we continue to make investments back into the community. We'll be sending out an on-demand link from today's presentation. So you're welcome to go back to this or share it. Hopefully you'll join us again in the future. Our Lunch and Learns usually are planned quarterly, and while we hope that one day soon we'll be seeing all of you actually in person for these, we'll continue to do these virtually as we need to. So I hope that you'll consider joining the Alliance and joining us again in the future, and we hope that you have a great week. Thanks so much.